I used to believe that stability was the same thing as happiness. For 4 years, I told myself that if a life looked calm from the outside, then it must be working on the inside too. Daniel and I had built something that made sense: shared rent, synchronized schedules, quiet dinners, and a marriage that never raised questions among friends. Yet sense, I was learning, is not the same as fulfillment. Daniel was 34, dependable to the point of predictability. He woke before sunrise, brewed his coffee the same way every morning, and left the apartment with a quick kiss that felt more like a habit than a promise. I was 29 and still searching for words to explain a restlessness I couldn't justify. Nothing was wrong with my husband. That was the problem. When there is no clear villain, guilt grows louder. We spoke efficiently. About bills, about work, about what needed fixing, rarely about what we felt. When I tried, Daniel listened politely, the way someone listens to the weather, aware but untouched. Over time, I stopped trying. Silence settled between us, not as an argument, but as a routine. The forest became my refuge long before it became anything else. It started as a practical decision: fresh air, exercise, time away from screens. The trail lay just beyond the edge of town, a stretch of earth where the noise of my life softened into birdsong and wind. In those early walks, I wasn't running from Daniel. I was walking toward myself, or at least the version of me that still asked questions. In the forest, no one expected anything from me. I wasn't a husband or a problem solver. I was just Ethan, moving forward, one step at a time. The trees didn't ask if I was happy. They didn't care if I was failing quietly. They simply stood, patient and indifferent, and somehow that felt like permission to breathe. Daniel noticed my walks but didn't question them. "Good for you," he said once, eyes still on his phone. That was the extent of it. No curiosity, no concern. I told myself I didn't need either. Still, a subtle ache followed me back home each time. I would unlock the door, step into our carefully arranged apartment, and feel like I was returning to a life already decided. I loved Daniel, or at least I loved who we had been when love felt urgent. But love without presence becomes something else: polite, careful, distant. Some nights, lying beside him, I wondered when we had stopped touching without intention. When a hand on my arm had turned into a signal rather than a feeling. I never accused him, even in my thoughts. I accused myself instead, for wanting more when I already had enough. That was the lie I kept repeating: enough should be sufficient. The morning everything began, I didn't wake up planning to change my life. Daniel left early for work, pressing a distracted kiss to my forehead. I watched him go, feeling that familiar mix of affection and emptiness. By late afternoon, I found myself on the forest trail again, the air cool, the ground soft beneath my shoes. As I walked, I thought about how easy it would be to continue like this forever, existing beside someone instead of with them. There was comfort in predictability, but there was also a quiet grief in realizing that no one was truly seeing me anymore, not even the man who shared my bed. I paused at a bend in the path, listening to the wind move through the leaves. For the first time, the thought crossed my mind, not as a plan, but as a possibility, that perhaps the life I was protecting was already slipping away. That maybe loyalty without connection was just another form of loneliness. I didn't know then that I was only minutes away from meeting two strangers who would force me to confront everything I had been avoiding. I only knew that the forest felt different that day, heavier somehow, as if it were holding its breath. If I had turned back at that moment, my marriage might have remained intact on paper. But I didn't turn back. I kept walking, unaware that the man I was about to become was already waiting for me between the trees. I hadn't gone far when I heard voices ahead of me, low and unhurried, blending with the rhythm of the forest. It startled me more than it should have. I was used to solitude on that trail, to the illusion that the woods belonged only to my thoughts. Instinctively, I slowed, considering whether to turn back, but before I could decide, my foot slipped on loose gravel. I didn't fall hard, but hard enough to draw attention. "Hey, are you okay?" A voice called out, close now. I looked up to see two men approaching. One of them reached me first, steadying my arm with a grip that was firm but careful. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a calm presence that felt grounding. "Easy," he said. "That spot gets tricky after rain." "I'm fine," I replied quickly, embarrassed more than hurt. "Just not watching my step." The second man smiled, an open, disarming expression that softened the moment. The forest has a way of reminding you to slow down, he said. His tone was light, almost playful. I'm Ryan, he added, gesturing to himself, then nodding toward the man beside him. That's Lucas. Ethan, I said, brushing dirt from my palms. Lucas studied me for a moment, not rudely, but with a quiet attentiveness that made me oddly self-conscious. You walk here often? He asked. Yeah, lately, I answered, unsure why the question felt personal. We fell into step together without discussion, the path narrowing just enough to require closeness. Ryan talked easily, filling the air with observations about the weather, the way the forest changed with the seasons. Lucas spoke less, but when he did, his words were deliberate, as if he chose them carefully. I told myself it was just conversation, the kind that happens between strangers who may never meet again. Still, I was acutely aware of my wedding ring when Ryan's gaze lingered on my hand for half a second too long before drifting away. He didn't comment. That silence carried more weight than a question. What brings you out here alone? Ryan asked eventually. I hesitated. The honest answer rose quickly, dangerously. Instead, I offered something safer. It helps me think. Lucas nodded, as if that confirmed something. Thinking can be risky, he said. You might discover things you can't unsee. The words landed deeper than I expected. I laughed softly, but it sounded thin even to me. We reached a clearing where the light filtered down in pale sheets, illuminating dust and drifting leaves. The three of us stopped, as though guided by the same instinct. For a brief moment, no one spoke. The silence wasn't awkward. It was charged. I should head back, I said finally, though I didn't move. Ryan tilted his head. We usually stop here for a bit, he said. You're welcome to join us. No pressure, no pressure. The phrase echoed in my mind. Everything in my life felt like pressure lately. Unspoken expectations, roles I was tired of performing. Standing there, with two men who knew nothing about me beyond my name, the offer felt dangerously tempting. I checked the time on my phone, a habit more than a necessity. Daniel wouldn't be home for hours. The thought brought an unexpected pang of guilt, sharp and immediate, followed by a quieter question. Was talking really a betrayal? I stayed. We sat on a fallen log, spaced just enough apart to pretend there was nothing intimate about the moment. Ryan talked about his work, his restless need to keep moving. Lucas listened, occasionally adding a comment that cut straight to the heart of what Ryan was saying. Watching them together, I sensed a familiarity between them that wasn't loud or performative. It was practiced, comfortable. And you? Lucas asked me, turning fully now. What are you running from? I'm not running, I said reflexively. Ryan smiled gently. That's usually what people say when they are. I surprised myself by answering honestly. I think I'm just tired of feeling invisible. The words hung between us, vulnerable and exposed. Neither man rushed to fill the space. Lucas's expression softened, something like recognition passing through his eyes. That happens more often than people admit, he said quietly. When I finally stood to leave, the air felt heavier than before, as if the forest itself were reluctant to let me go. We exchanged brief goodbyes, promises left intentionally vague. As I walked away, I didn't look back, afraid of what I might see, or want. Yet with every step toward the trail's end, I knew one thing with unsettling clarity: this meeting wasn't finished. It had merely begun, and some unseen line inside me had already shifted, making it impossible to return unchanged. I told myself I wouldn't go back the next day, or the day after that. I told myself that chance encounters were only meaningful because we assigned them meaning, and that removing intention would drain them of power. Yet intention has a way of revealing itself through repetition. By the end of the week, the forest trail had become less of an escape and more of an appointment I never admitted to making. Daniel noticed the change before I did. Not directly, he wasn't observant in that way, but in the quiet recalibrations of our life. I stayed out longer. I smiled more at nothing. I answered questions half a second too late, as if my thoughts had somewhere else to be. When he asked how my walks were going, I said, good, and hated how easy the life felt. Lucas and Ryan were always there when I arrived, as if the forest had arranged us carefully, removing coincidence from the equation. We never planned our meetings, which made them feel innocent, almost fated. But innocence fades when anticipation takes its place. We talked about everything except what mattered most. Ryan spoke openly, his emotions visible and unapologetic. He laughed easily, touched my arm when he spoke, then pulled back just enough to leave the warmth behind. Lucas was different. He asked questions that lingered, questions that didn't seek information so much as truth. "How long have you been married?" he asked one afternoon, his tone neutral. "4 years," I replied. "And are you happy?" He didn't soften the question. He didn't sharpen it either. I hesitated too long. Ryan noticed. So did Lucas. "I don't know," I said finally, and the honesty startled me. Ryan looked at the ground, tracing a pattern in the dirt with his shoe. Lucas met my eyes steadily. "Not knowing is an answer," he said. Those words followed me home like a shadow. That night, Daniel talked about his day, about deadlines and frustrations I had heard 100 times before. I listened, nodded in the right places, and wondered when empathy had turned into obligation. When he reached for my hand, I felt the contact but not the connection. Guilt bloomed quietly in my chest, heavier than desire, heavier than longing. I didn't tell Lucas and Ryan about that night, or about any of the nights after it. But I didn't need to. Something in my expression must have shifted, because the next time we met, Ryan looked at me with concern instead of curiosity. "You look tired," he said. "I am," I answered. "Just everything." He nodded, as if that explained more than I'd said. "You don't have to carry it alone," he offered. Lucas said nothing, but his silence pressed in on me, demanding more honesty than I was ready to give. The line I had promised myself I wouldn't cross grew thinner each day, not because of touch or confession, but because of attention. They listened. They remembered. They saw the parts of me I had buried under responsibility and routine. Emotional intimacy crept in quietly, disguising itself as understanding. One afternoon, as the light began to fade, Lucas stopped walking and turned to face me. "You keep circling something," he said. "At some point, you either step into it or walk away." "I'm not looking to change my life," I said quickly. Ryan exhaled, a sound caught between hope and restraint. "No one ever is." The truth was, I had already changed it. I just hadn't accepted the cost yet. I was hiding pieces of myself from my husband, offering them instead to two men who had no claim on me, and yet felt closer than the one who did. That night, lying beside Daniel, sleep refused to come. My thoughts replayed conversations, glances, silences heavy with implication. I realized with a slow, sinking clarity that the betrayal had already occurred, not in action, but in intention. My heart had leaned outward before my body ever moved. By the time morning arrived, I understood something I could no longer ignore. Whatever happened next would demand a reckoning. With Daniel, with Lucas and Ryan, with myself, and the forest, once my refuge, had become the place where I could no longer pretend not to see the truth waiting for me among the trees. Daniel confronted me on a quiet evening, the kind that usually passed without memory. We were sitting across from each other at the kitchen table, plates untouched, the space between us filled with something heavier than words. He didn't accuse me. That hurt more than if he had. "You've been somewhere else," he said calmly. "And I don't mean the forest." I could have denied it. I had practiced the lie often enough. But something in his expression, tired, resolute, stripped of illusion, made dishonesty feel crueler than confession. I took a breath that felt like surrender. "I haven't cheated," I said. "Not physically." Daniel nodded slowly, as if he had already expected that answer. And emotionally, the silence that followed was my answer. I told him about the walks, about Lucas and Ryan, about conversations that went further than they should have. I didn't dramatize it. I didn't minimize it either. I spoke plainly, because anything less would have been another betrayal. Daniel listened without interruption, his hands folded neatly on the table, his composure more devastating than anger. "When did you stop choosing me?" he asked quietly. The question pierced deeper than any accusation. I searched for a moment in time, a single failure I could point to, but none existed. "I don't think it was a moment," I said. "I think it was a slow forgetting. On both sides." Daniel stood, not abruptly, but with the deliberateness of someone making a difficult decision. "I need time," he said, "to decide if forgetting can be undone." That night, he slept in the spare room. The distance between us, once emotional, had finally become physical. The next day, I went to the forest knowing it would be the last time I could come without consequences. Lucas and Ryan were already there, sitting in the clearing where everything had begun. Ryan stood when he saw me, hope flickering across his face before he could hide it. Lucas remained seated, his gaze steady, cautious. "I told him," I said before either of them could speak. Ryan's expression softened with sympathy. "And And now I have to live with it. Lucas studied me closely. What do you want, Ethan? He asked. Not what you're escaping. Not what you're afraid of losing. The question demanded more than impulse. It demanded clarity. I realized then that while Ryan offered warmth and Lucas offered understanding, neither of them could offer absolution. That was something I had to face alone. I don't know yet, I admitted. But I know I can't keep standing in the middle. Ryan nodded slowly, disappointment tempered by respect. That's still an answer. We sat together for a while, speaking less than we had before. There was no flirtation now, no unspoken promise hovering in the air. Just three people acknowledging the shape of a moment that had already passed. When I finally stood to leave, Lucas rose as well. Whatever you choose, he said, choose it honestly. I walked away without looking back, not out of fear, but out of acceptance. Some connections are meant to awaken you, not accompany you forward. In the weeks that followed, Daniel and I existed in careful negotiation. There were long conversations and longer silences. Some days felt hopeful, others felt like rehearsals for goodbye. Nothing was decided quickly, and perhaps that was the point. For the first time in years, we were speaking honestly, even when honesty hurt. I didn't return to the forest. Not because it had betrayed me, but because it had done its work. It had shown me the cost of being unseen and the danger of seeking reflection in unfamiliar eyes. I don't know yet how my marriage will end, or if it will end at all. What I do know is this: infidelity doesn't always announce itself with touch. Sometimes it begins with attention, with listening, with the quiet relief of being understood. And once you see that truth, you can't unsee it. You can only decide what kind of life you're brave enough to live next.